Just like you can nest if statements within each other to your heart's content as many times as you need to get the job done, you can also do the same thing with loops. And really, there's no restriction on what kinds of loops can contain other kinds of loops. So, for instance, you can have a while loop that contains a for loop that contains a do while loop, and that's just fine. The reason that I bring this concept up is because it's very common practice in C++ to nest loops within each other to get certain jobs done. As a matter of fact, with certain jobs, it's practically a requirement. And so, say for instance that you wanted to traverse your way through a table, through all of the rows and all of the columns. Well, nested for loops turns out to be a wonderful strategy for this. And it goes a little something like this. You just have a for loop here that works through all of the rows. And so we'll start off with the 0th row here. And say we have 5 rows in our table. So we'll restrict this for loop to 5 iterations to deal with each of the rows. And then we'll iterate through each of the rows incrementally, one by one here. And so this outer for loop just steps through the rows, starting off with row 0, going to row 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then, well, at that point, this statement is no longer valid. Once row equals 5, 5 is no longer less than 5, and, well, we move on with life. Skip this code block underneath. So this steps through each row from 0 through 4. Well, they're numbered funny, but it's still 5 rows, 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Convince yourself of that. Now that we've got a mechanism for stepping through each of the rows, on the inside of this for loop, we're going to put another for loop. We're going to nest a for loop that steps through each of the columns. And so here we're going to have a similar strategy, starting off with the 0th column. And so we also have 5 columns here. So we'll make our column variable restricted to going up to a value of 5 there as a test condition. And then we'll step through each of the columns one by one. And so now you see a sort of pattern here where we're dealing with row 0 at first. 0 is less than 5, so that's a true condition. We're allowed to enter this code block here. Now this inner for loop just steps through all of the columns 0 through 4. So we're still on row 0, but we're going to step through column 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then after this is done executing, we're going to increment to row 1. And then we're going to start over again and increment through all the columns, 0 through 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And once this is done executing, we're going to increment to row 2, column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Row 3, column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Row 4, column 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And so this is the general essence of how you would traverse through a table using nested for loops. And so let's, print out something to show that this works just like that. And so we can say that we're dealing with row, and, well, whatever row we're dealing with, we're sort of giving an address here. We're dealing with this particular column now, and then we'll print off a column. And then, well, I'm going to tab over a couple of spaces here, because what's going to happen here is as this print statement is executing, is that we're going to start off dealing with row 0, and, well, we're going to start off dealing with column 0, right? But this column gets stepped through 5 times before this row gets stepped through yet another time. And so, in essence, we're going to deal with column 0, so row 0, column 0, and then we're going to tab over a couple of times because of this. And then we're going to print out to the screen row 0, column 1, because row didn't increment, but column did again. We're still in this inner for loop. And then we're going to tab over a couple of times, right? And then we're going to print out row 0, column 2, tab over, row 0, column 3, tab, row 0, column 4. Now, once this gets up to column being incremented from 4 to 5, 5 is no longer less than 5 here. And so this for loop is done executing. And if we wanted to drop down a line in our print statement, well, here's the spot where we would do it. We have to drop down a line here. And so this will drop us down a line, for instance. And now this entire code block is done executing. And because this entire code block is done executing, remember, we're still on row 0. So we're going to increment from row 0 to row 1. We're going to test this again. 1 is still less than 5. And then we're going to execute this entire inner for loop all over, starting from 0. And so now we're dealing with row 1, column 0, tab over a couple times, row 1, column 1, row 1, column 2, row 1, column 3, row 1, column 4. This whole for loop is now done executing. We drop down a line. This row gets incremented to row 2, and 2 is still less than 5. Great, let's enter in our for loop. And so now we deal with columns 0 through 4 again, but this time row 2. So row 2, column 0, row 2, column 1, row 2, column 2, row 2, column 3, row 2, column 4. Same pattern. We're done. We drop down a line here because of this. And then we come up and we increment to row 3. 3 is less than 5. We do the inner for loop again. Row 3, column 0, row 3, column 1, row 3, column 2, 3, 3, 3, 4. We drop down a line because of this. So drop down a line on our print job one more time. And this is the last row now. And we increment to row 4. 4 is less than 5. That is a true statement. And we go through the column dance one more time. Row 4, column 0, row 4, column 1, row 4, column 2, row 4, column 3, and row 4, column 4. And that's it. Once this gets up to row 5, 5 is no longer less than 5, and this outer for loop never executes again. And so this code block gets skipped, and then we start executing whatever code comes next. And so you see here that we're stepping through each of our rows one by one from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, but this whole line is all 0. This whole line is all 1. This is all the second row. This is all the third row, for instance. And then the second number is all our column numbers, all zeros, all ones, all twos, all threes, all fours. And while you see this in practice, when we actually run this code here, you see that we're dealing with all row zeros through this entire row, all row ones through this entire row, row 2, row 3, row 4, and same thing, all column zeros, all column ones, all column 2s, all column 3s, all column 4s. And so in essence, we've traversed this entire table in that order, dealing from this upper corner, working our way right, dropping down a line, working our way right, and dropping down a line, working our way right, and so forth. That's the order in which we worked through this table in this particular example. And it's a great strategy for working through tables in essence. If you want to change the value at a particular spot, if you want to grab the value from a particular spot, if you wanted to manipulate values with each other, you can use an addressing system and for loops and all that stuff to make sure that you hit each of the spots within the table like this. So hopefully this wasn't too confusing, but it's a very common thing, and you're going to see this pop up over and over again. So see you in the next one.